Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. The ongoing visit of Emperor Akihito and Empress Michiko to India, the first ever by a Japanese emperor, is being seen as a landmark event in the Indo-Japanese ties. That in its 2,600-year history of the Japanese monarchy, the world's oldest continuous hereditary royalty, no emperor had visited India before, and that they are doing now is in itself an occasion to celebrate. According to analysts, the decision of the emperor to visit India signals the seriousness with which Japan looks at India as a partner in many spheres, after years of rather subdued relationship. That Japan is looking at India not only for its economic revival, but also for enhancing a strategic tie-up is underlined by the fact that Japanese Prime Minister is scheduled to visit India in the next year. What does the visit of Emperor Akihito mean to the relationship between the two countries and its future? How will this visit help reshape the relations and what it also means to entire Asia and the Indo-Pacific region? How China will look at this visit and the improvement in the relationships between India and Japan. We will look at all this today with Rajiv Sikri, former Secretary, Ministry for External Affairs, Dr. Baladas Ghoshal, Senior Fellow, Center for Policy Research, Dr. Choudhury, Associate Professor at the Center for East Asian Studies, JNU, and Jyoti Malhotra, Senior Journalist who has been covering foreign affairs for several years. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Sikri, I would like to come to you first. What does this visit mean to? Why is it that for so many years that none of the emperors bothered to visit India, and why now?
I think it's a very important visit symbolically. It's a goodwill visit meant to signal the high level of India-Japan relations. The fact that the emperor has not visited India ever before is because Japan in general had not looked at India with the degree of seriousness that it is looking at today. India didn't figure on their radar. It's only since about 2004, and particularly after former Prime Minister Koizumi's visit, when Mr. Abe, the current Prime Minister, was the Chief Cabinet Secretary. It is only since then that Japan is beginning to look at India seriously, both from a bilateral angle as well as from a larger strategic perspective. The bilateral, we have been looking at it seriously because we think that it is a source of capital, technology, investment and so forth. And the Japanese, because they see India as a market, and they have also begun to wonder, if others are doing business, why aren't we doing business?
So what you're saying is till around 2004 or 21st at the beginning,
21st century.
In the 21st century only Japan realized that how important India is as a market.
Yes, absolutely. I think that also I would say the start goes to 2000 when Mori came here. And it was the nuclear tests which, I think shook up the whole world, including Japan. So then they,
more so Japan probably.
Yeah, but they have, because they have their own position on the nuclear issue, and that was an impediment to the growth of ties. But by 2004, they had decided that we will not let this be an impediment, and then we worked together. The G4, the attempt to join the UN Security Council as permanent members, and various other factors that came in the way there. I think that this is a very important signal to the people of Japan, to the people of India, and to the rest of the world.
To the rest of the world. That's the rest of the world is also very important. Dr. Ghoshal, rest of the world, China is, whenever, at least in the last few years, that whenever there's discussion about India and Japan, China invariably is part of that discussion, this triangular. So, is this something which China will be looking at with certain amount of concern?
Definitely. I mean, China looks at India as such is not that important to China. It's only when the other powers come into the equation, right, only then China gets upset about it. But I have a different view about Japan. Although I'm not an expert on Japan, but I lived in Japan for 2 years, right, teaching there. The impression that I gathered is that Japan is a reluctant Asian power. It's always looked towards the West. China's rise was accepted very grudgingly by Japan. And it's because of China, to my mind, that Japan is looking towards India. That's why you see a bit mismatch. They are much more interested today in terms of security cooperation rather than economic and other things. But look at China. You know, when it tries to cultivate a friend, particularly in Asia, it first begins with economic thrust.
Right.
And they become extremely generous if they don't expect reciprocity. Now, in the case of Japan, you see, although security cooperation is now becoming more and more important in the dialogue, the economics is not advancing. Look at their investment in China is 300 billion. What about India? It's much less. So I think Japan will have to also change a little bit in terms of their appreciation of India's position. I mean, they can't look at India only as a kind of a countervailing force to China. It has to look towards much more economic, interactions between the two countries.
Jyoti, you think that they're not already looking at the economic aspect of it?
I think the economics is extremely important, and I agree with Professor.
Economics is important from both sides, or is it more
From both
important for
sides.
Japan than for India?
No, I think it's very important on both sides. And while I agree both with the Master Sikri and with Professor Ghoshal that it's more than, it's a very important symbolic visit by the emperor, but it's also very important strategic relationship. But the economics is the fundamental and the foundation of the relationship. We cannot forget that 5 or 6 years ago, or even longer, Japan has decided to basically fund the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. It's more than a 1,000 long kilometer corridor between Delhi and Mumbai, and now there is a second stage that is going to be between Chennai and Bangalore, and these are basically the economic arteries of India. And along the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, where in fact we are going to get Japanese trains to run along this sort of high-speed corridor, you're going to have cities, industrial cities on both sides of this corridor, and that's what I'd like to point out. Both these sort of experts are completely right that it is a very, very important strategic relationship. But why is it so important? The fact is that Japan is looking at India not only because it's a big market, of course India has a big population and a big market, but listen, we are the only big Asian power apart from China, which is a source of stability. We are a big country, we're an ancient civilization, but also I think modern India has shown to the rest of the world, especially to Asia, that we are here to stay and we are here to expand our influence in a benign manner across South Asia and across the rest of Asia. But having said that, the fundamentals or the foundation of this relationship is an economic one, and of course the strategic aspect is very important, but there is no question, both for India and for Japan, the foundation and the fundamental
has to be economic.
It has to be economic.
Dr. Rai Choudhury, you think that the strategic relationship which we're talking about, we have seen Indo-Japanese joint naval exercises and things like that. How much further can this strategic relationship go further?
I think the strategic relationship is just at its nascent in the Indo-Japan relationship, because if you look at it, strategic
you think the Japanese are interested in pursuing this relationship further?
I personally think yes, they have reasons to. The SLOC, that is the sea lanes through which their oil travels, we are also now party to protecting their vessels. Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean issues. That's why you had Abe once talking about confluence of the sea in 2007 Parliament. And I think that arc of freedom with Japan and India at two ends seems to be very constructively taking shape in these ties that is happening. But I would like to go back and talk about the emperor's visit per se, and I feel while at a macro level, at a broader level, yes, the emperor coming to India means a lot. Every country gets a signal of what it is. But I think it's a huge signal for the Japanese common man that the emperor has stepped out and gone where? Gone to India. Especially so for the SME, that is the small and medium scale enterprises who have shied away from coming to India. We've been for the last 2000 to 2008, almost every year there's been delegations after delegations coming in, looking at us, but we've not had concrete movement of the SMEs. And I think this visit, this soft power symbol, that has come across out here and gone, and now I can see it in the dailies of all the Japanese newspapers. There is a mention of it. There is a, that warmth that is there between the two countries is getting a huge projection, and I think this would be the final, probably, a symbol that will influence the SMEs to travel here.
Mr. Sikri, revival Japan as a global power. Is this part of that exercise to revive themselves as a global power? Would you see it as some attempt on its part to draw away from the US clutches which it is seen to be?
I don't think that the Japanese will want to dilute their security relationship with the United States. That's very fundamental. But at the same time, they are not quite sure about the extent of the US commitment because the US has a very close relationship and interdependence with China also.
Right.
So one new prong of their strategy is to develop ties with the other Asian powers, not just India, but other Asian powers like Indonesia or Philippines or Vietnam and so forth. So this intra-Asian
But all
cooperation-
this creates concerns in the Chinese.
Well, that's another matter because see, for the Japanese, China is very important. But as Shravani pointed out very importantly, that this is the signal to the Japanese people, because what has been holding back economic cooperation is the lack of interest among the medium and small scale Japanese businessmen. The big businesses are here, but not the medium. Now this is very important.
It was not for lack of trying by India.
No, we have been trying, but you have to have something which catches the imagination. And another point which I just like to make is that while economic cooperation is important, I don't think one should underestimate the strategic relationship. Let me take an example. With Russia, we have a very strong strategic relationship, but not so good economic relationship. It may be the same with Japan, though I think the Japanese economic relationship at present and the potential is much, much better.
Absolutely.
But the strategic, I would not underplay it at all. I think it is extremely important. It's the only country with which we have a 2+2 dialogue, namely the foreign and the defense secretaries meet. We have an annual meeting of the prime ministers, which is the only other country apart from Russia. We have meetings with maritime, the defense secretaries, the navies, joint exercises, a trilateral with the USA and Japan. And
No, but when you talk of strategic relationship, how can we go further? Joint naval exercises and all is fine, but what are the next steps in?
Well, when you have the joint exercises, when you have sharing of how you operate, because there could be a situation where you may want to operate together. And I'd like to go back to 2007 when Mr. Abe was Prime Minister for the first time. And he had the idea of the Quad: India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. Let us work together.
Right.
Now that spooked the Chinese. And for various reasons, including the fact that Abe went out of power and the Australian leader also changed, it fell off. But it has not been given up. Now the new idea which Mr. Abe has come is the democracy diamond. It's the common values.
The diamond of democracy.
Whatever. So, so this idea that these four countries, that we have common values, we are democracies, we rule of law, we share so many values in common. So this factor is important. And I think that we should build on it. Because I think that the rise of China is a very, very important factor for the whole world, particularly for those in Asia. And I think it is important that other countries of Asia should send the signal to China that the kind of aggressive behavior and bullying that it is engaged in will be met with a determined and united response.
Dr. Ghoshal, you think there is a degree of US nudging to as far as this improvement in the relationship is concerned with India?
I don't think it is just US nudging. I think Japan itself also feels the necessity. But again, I would go back to that link between economic and strategy thing. Strategic cooperation is always based on a kind of a shifting sand, because the perceptions change, your things change from time to time. So that is not a very abiding kind of relationship. What really gives a stake, what brings a stake in the relationship is the economic content of it. Look at China-Japan relationship. Despite all the saber rattling that has been going on between the two countries, the kind of economic interdependence that they have really practically negates any kind of possibility of any kind of war between the two countries.
That is, but Jyoti, that what Dr. Ghoshal is saying is one view that economic has to be the basis. But there is another view which says that unless you have a strategic relationship, the economic relationship will not be the relationship will not be stable. That only a strategic partnership can also stabilize the economic relationship also.
But Girish, in life, you cannot divorce one from the other, right? Everything has to be interconnected. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, by the way, you also, I'm sure you know that the Japanese have taken a decision that they will not invest or practically not invest anymore in China. They have a very, very close, as Professor Ghoshal pointed out, very close economic interdependence, but they have taken this decision strategically, and therefore they will now begin to invest in India economically. So what I'm trying to say is
they also need a
so
place
the
to invest.
economic and strategic interdependence is bound to happen, especially when big nations, create positions, make strategies, and India does the same. After all, if you look at India, on the one hand, we do have a reasonably good economic relationship with China, although we all know that the India-China sort of relationship, whether you call it strategic or defense or political, is not a very comfortable one, right? Having said that, I think what India is also trying to do we've invited the Japanese emperor, as Master Sikri has said, it's a hugely important symbolic gesture, visit. Now, why has the emperor of Japan come to India? The reason, and I think the answer to that is that the Japanese want a much greater relationship with the Indians, but so do the Indians, I think.
Absolutely.
So I think unless, and more than that, also I think there's a people-to-people component of this relationship. The fact that the emperor and the empress went to the Lodi Gardens, that is such a lovely gesture. And meeting the people, the ordinary sort of, the elite as well as the ordinary people.
Honeymoon days.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Choudhury, in this whole situation, what Jyoti is also saying, the defense, the strategic cooperation needs to be improved and things like that. Where are the areas? I've been asking. One of the areas which is being suggested by some analysts and commentators is that maybe in the defense cooperation, cooperation can improve further. Is there any scope for that?
I think that
Are these two countries looking at it at all?
If you look at the civil nuclear deal
Civil nuclear deal is still not worked
out. But if you look at it, in the previous joint agreement, we've already had the amphibian boats that's come in, which is supposed to be for the civilian purposes. Japan has technology even in military science, and I think when we look towards a defense or a strategic partnership and cooperation, I think it'll be this exploring this technology. And Japan has a huge trust in Indian Navy right now, especially after the two incidents, which if you look at it, since those two incidents, the kind of reach that is happening between the two countries with respect to military force, travel between the defense and the Japanese institutes, where defense institutes and maritime institutes, I think the technology is one place where there will be collaboration that would be significantly taking long strides right now.
Joint defense production.
Production weapon systems.
Yeah, Mr. Sikri, joint defense production, is it something which can be worked out?
I think so. I think
and in the context of improving, enhancing the FDI in defense and things like that.
Absolutely. But in addition to the areas that Dr. Choudhury has mentioned, I would like to also flag technology in civil areas. There was an agreement on rare earths, on extraction of energy from
That is again to counter China.
No, but it's a very important area. Not necessarily to comment. You see, let's not forget that at the end of the day,
what is said is that this rare earth thing, is India and Japan trying not so that coming together so that there is not much dependence on China on that.
No, but it's not just that. I think we have to bear in mind that together with the United States and Germany or European countries, Japan is a technology leader, and in many technologies it is number one. So it is.
At
it
least
is,
25 years back, everybody only spoke about Japan.
It is in our interest to tap the Japanese technology, to get the Japanese companies interested in India. And there's a huge thing which will be open up for us. Now, I'd also like to just flag that from our side, we have also made gestures, like Mr. Ashwani Kumar as the special envoy with cabinet rank
Right.
for the visit. And that's a gesture from our side. The Prime Minister going to the airport to receive the Emperor and the Empress. The fact that Mr. Abe has been invited as chief guest on Republic Day next year.
Right.
All these are our gestures. So what the Japanese keenness is reciprocated by us also. And that is why I think that there is a very good basis for going ahead.
So you think that India is also doing this deliberately with sending signals to China that we are improving relationship,
Again-
or you think that we are playing that balancing?
No, I think the China angle is one, but it is not openly stated, because at the end of the day, China-Japan relations are very, very important, much more important than India-Japan relations. And we should never forget that for Japan, maintaining a good, equitable relationship with China will always be number one priority. But everyone likes to have a hedging strategy. But the more important thing is that Japan by itself is a hugely important country. Till a few months ago, it was the number 2 economy in the world. It's number 3 today. It's a source of technology, capital, no problems, no bilateral issues.
And we've never had any problems with
No,
this.
and the history that after the Second World War, we did not sign the peace treaty, and there's so much goodwill for India and Japan.
Yes, Dr. Chai.
I also think what would happen is, India is slowly emerging as a geostrategic, country for Japan. Because if you look at it, if Africa is going to be their destination, then India can become a good hub for production. And these are, so when you talk about Indo-Japan relationship, I think it's never been a better time. 1950s we said yes, harmony, etc. But right now, I think the two key things, that is an geo-economic positioning of India as well as geostrategic positioning of India. Both have emerged at the right time, at the right context, and that is why it will become very important for Japan to
Jyoti,
move forward.
this Indo-Japan civil nuclear cooperation, why is it not still, why have they not been able to work out? What are the impediments in that?
I think
And you think this visit will help in taking that further? By the time Abe comes, you think there'll be something?
I think in this visit you have the Emperor and the Empress. I doubt that they're going to talk about civil nuclear issues or even more sort of political issues in that sense. It is a symbolic visit, as you've mentioned, and I think that in itself is the importance of the visit. Although he is going to Chennai from Delhi, and Chennai, as you know, is a big hub of Japanese sort of companies in India. As far as the civil nuclear dialogue is concerned, I think the Japanese want India to sign off on a couple of other issues, which the Indians are reluctant to do. Also, I think, exactly, on the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. I think the Indians are somewhat reluctant to do this at this stage because, there were several hurdles that were crossed when the Indo-US nuclear deal was signed in 2008. And India has said, one is the CTBT, the other is, I think the Japanese want India to say that we will never conduct another nuclear test.
Right.
And I think the Indians are hesitant in making that position and writing it down on a piece of paper because you never know how the situation in the Indian subcontinent changes. Pakistan on the one hand, but China on the other. China, which is an acknowledged nuclear power, a de facto and a de jure nuclear power, and of course is considered by most people as India's greatest rival. So the Indians are hesitant in doing that. But the Japanese are very keen because of their own experience of nuclear holocaust with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I think there is a great deal of understanding of the Japanese position. And, over the next few years, once Shinzo Abe comes to Delhi in January, I think there could be greater clarity. But I frankly, it is a bit of a hurdle, especially because Japanese companies, which now own American companies in
Yes.
significant degree, whether it's Westinghouse or General Electric, now those American companies are then cannot invest in India
Exactly.
and make deals in India. So that's the big triangle. But there is some conversation between India and the US. When the Prime Minister went to the US a couple of months ago, there was this early works agreement.
Right.
So I think, this will take time. But the fact that there is a much more open political understanding between India and Japan, just like there is between India and the US, I think that is really the major achievement in these days.
Dr. Ghoshal, you think, Japan has been seen always as this pacifist nation because of its history and because of its experiences in the war and things like that. You think it is trying to come out of that kind of a approach towards issues globally?
I see a major trend towards that direction, because some of the statements that you see from some of the important leaders, I think they still retain their pacifist constitution and all that. But at the same time, you see a certain trend within Japan to get away from that. And obviously the North Korean nuclear issue
Yes.
is one of the important factors. Then China is another important factor. But I would like to come back to that cooperation part of it. The joint defense production of weapons systems should
Right.
be one of the areas, because that's one of the areas where India, imports a huge amount of weapon system from abroad.
Right.
And being one of the countries which aspires to play an important role and talk about strategic autonomy, you can't do that unless you have your own sort
Weapon
of
systems.
production system.
Right.
Pharmaceutical is another important
Right.
factor. Japanese spent per capita about $8,000, per capita on medical expenses. Now, most of the benefits now are going towards China at the moment. Now, that's one area I think where India can really make some advance
And
in terms of medical.
Medical tourism can
That's
happen.
right.
Japanese
That's another
people.
area.
Mr. Sikri, final words to you. About this, what was said about this pacifist approach of Japan. Do you see it changing at all?
Well, Mr. Abe, if he stays in power, has made it clear that he intends to change the constitution, if he can get the support, and remove Article 9, which permits only self-defense, Article 9, I think, no? Which permits only self-defense forces and not regular armed forces. Although the armed forces are very, very large and very sophisticated. One of the things I'd like to just flag is that when our Prime Minister was there a few months ago, he said something which we should note. He said, Japan is our natural and indispensable partner
Right.
in the region. Now that's a very strong phraseology which sends a huge signal. I would not worry too much about the nuclear aspect. The important thing is that the nuclear aspect is no longer an impediment for the growth of relations as it was for many
As it
years.
was.
And there are so many other new fields to conquer, and I'm sure that as a result of the Emperor's visit and the forthcoming visit of Prime Minister Abe next January, it's not been announced, but that's what we understand, I'm sure that we'll get a qualitative jump in the relations
I think
between
on
the
that
two
note, we
countries.
need to completely run out of time. On that positive note, on that very optimistic note, that this visit is going to send signals and also have many other partnerships with Japan, about whom Indians have very strong and very nice feelings about. When you talk of Japan, you think of love in Tokyo. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Rajiv Sikri, Arabani Roy Choudhury, Dr. Baladas, Ghoshal and Jyoti Malhotra. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on Big Picture, same time tomorrow.